Space Marines are the most played silhouette in Warhammer 40,000. And they're not one army. They're at least 6. Vanilla Codex Marines, plus 5 divergent chapters. Blood Angels, Dark Angels, Space Wolves, Black Templars, and Deathwatch, leaving Grey Knights aside as their own thing. Each has its own units, its own detachments, its own identity. So the natural question is, which chapter is actually best? Over the next 15 minutes, we'll take all 6 through the archive's tournament data across the 11th edition. Win rates, the detachments that carry them, and the units the winning lists actually run. And I'll tell you now where this lands. No Marine chapter is dominant. The whole family is clustered just below even. And inside each chapter, the detachment you pick matters more than the badge on the shoulder. And that framing matters, because people ask, are Space Marines good, as if there's one answer. There isn't. The chapter changes your units, your detachments, your whole plan. From Blood Angels Jump Pack Alpha Strike to Dark Angels Bike Born Speed to the Deathwatch's elite kill teams. 6 armies in the same power armor, and the data treats each as its own faction. So let's rank them honestly. Game counts next to every number, and a no read wherever the sample can't bear it. This is the Infinite Archive, the Adeptus Astartes, chapter by chapter. Here is the whole family on one screen, edition to date. And the first thing to notice is how little separates them. Deathwatch shows the highest number, but on only 63 games, so hold that lightly. It's a placeholder, not a read. Every chapter with a real sample lands between 42 and 49%. Codex Marines lead the pack that actually matters at just under 49. Dark Angels and Space Wolves a shade behind. Black Templars below. And Blood Angels, the most beloved chapter in the game, propping up the table at 42.5. There is no 55% Marine chapter. There is no menace here. What there is a very large, very popular, solidly mid-tier family. And the interesting differences aren't between the chapters. They're inside them. Let's go one at a time. Why so tightly clustered? Because they share a chassis. Every chapter draws from the same core of intercessors, scouts, and heavy support, then bolts its flavor on top. That shared floor stops any of them collapsing. A Marine army always has a functional baseline, but it also caps the ceiling because the flavor rarely adds enough to break from the pack. The result is the tightest family in the game. 6 armies within 7 points of each other, all orbiting the 50% line. The differences that matter are one level down, in the detachments. That's where we're going. One more family level lens before we go chapter by chapter. The missions. Force disposition is the scoring identity a list locks in, and it splits the armies that want to hold ground from the ones that want to spread out and disrupt. Here is every Space Marine game from the last 4 weeks, sorted by how the family scores in each. And the shape is the whole video in a single slide. Mid everywhere, dominant nowhere. Their best mission is reconnaissance, a hair over 50%. The mobile board control mission the fast Codex and Ravenwing builds are actually built for. Priority assets sits just behind. But look closer. There is no green on this board. Even the family's best mission is a coin flip. And the floor is disruption. Barely over 41%, an 8-point average scoring deficit. The mission that makes you fight spread out across the whole table, which is exactly where a mid-range Marine army least wants to be. Hold that thought as we go chapter by chapter, because the aggressive builds struggle most precisely where the missions won't let you simply delete the opponent and call it scoring. Start with vanilla. Codex Space Marines. 48.9% over 722 games, the largest sample of any Marine army, and a composite that sits comfortably average. This is the toolbox chapter. No gimmick, no restriction, and, crucially, access to the strongest generic detachments in the family. The most played build is Forgefather's Seekers, a Salamander's gun line, at 54.6% across more than 200 games. The Librarius Conclave, a psychic support engine, runs in about a sixth of their games, but only manages 45. And the ceiling is higher still. The Blade of Ultramar detachment posts 55.7. The winning lists lean on the humble scout squad, in 64% of them, doing the quiet objective work, plus intercessors, stern guard, and a pair of librarians. The read on Codex Marines is simple. If you want to win with Space Marines, and you don't care about a specific chapter's flavor, this is the pick. It's flexible, it's forgiving, and it holds the best detachments on the shelf. It's worth being precise about what flexible buys you. Forge Father's Seekers rewards a gunline. The Librarius Conclave leans on psychic characters to buff and screen the line. Blade of Ultramar is the aggressive, board-controlling build that posts the highest number. A Codex player reads the week's missions and the field and picks the detachment that fits. The other chapters are largely locked into their identity. That optionality is the whole pitch. The downside is, there's no signature trick, nothing that spikes a matchup. Vanilla wins by being competent everywhere and punished nowhere. And for a lot of players, that's exactly the army they want. And look at what the winning Codex lists. 53 of them with a positive record. Actually run, a pair of librarians for psychic support in 2/3 of them. Stern Guard and double Infernus squads for firepower. Cheap scouts to hold the map. And often Vulcan Hestan anchoring the Forge Father's build. Flexible, but with a clear winning skeleton underneath. Now the payoff. Remember the family averages just under 49%. Mid-tier, no menace. But hidden inside Codex Space Marines is one detachment doing something completely different. Blade of Ultramar, the Ultramarines' own detachment, is winning 55.7% across 87 games. That is not a mid-tier number. That's a top-of-the-game number, sitting quietly inside an average faction. And the build is remarkably consistent. 9 in 10 lists run Marneus Calgar in the armor of Antilochus, backed by the Victrix Honor Guard, a pair of repulsor executioners to carry the army up the board, and a floor of intercessors, scouts, and incursors to hold the map. This is the whole video in one slide. The faction is average. The right detachment is a contender. If you're a Marine player chasing a result, you don't pick a chapter. You pick this. And here's the trap, because it's the same box of models. Ceramite Sentinels runs a nearly identical core to Blade of Ultramar. The same intercessors, the same double repulsor executioners, and Calgar and the Victrix Honor Guard turn up in more than half its lists too. Same models, same points. But Ceramite Sentinels is winning just 41.8% across 49 games. A full 14 points below its Ultramarines cousin, on what is essentially the same army. This is the single most important thing to understand about Space Marines this edition. The models are shared across every chapter and detachment. So the models are not the variable. The detachment rule is the variable. 2 players can own the identical collection, and one is a contender while the other sits near the bottom, decided almost entirely by which detachment they wrote at the top of the list. Blade of Ultramar and Ceramite Sentinels are the same army twice. One wins. Pick carefully. Blood Angels. And here's the uncomfortable one, because they're probably the most beloved Marine chapter in the game. 42.5% addition to date, 37 this week, and the weakest composite of the 6 by a distance. Look at their detachments, and there's no hiding place. The Liberator Assault Group at 40.7, Rage-Cursed Onslaught at 41, and even the best of them, Legacy of Grace, only 45. Every single Blood Angels detachment sits below 50%. The army's identity is right there in the winning lists. Sanguinary Guard in nearly 90% of them. Death Company with jump packs. A captain with a jump pack. Les Martes. This is the fly up the board and punch army. The problem is that in the current edition, that aggression is getting answered. The lists that want to close the distance are taking too much fire on the way in, and the missions reward holding ground the Blood Angels would rather leave. It's not that the army can't win, it's that right now it's asking you to play uphill. This is the one chapter in the family I'd tell you to bring for love, not for record. Dig into the matchup and you can see the tax. Blood Angels want to commit their expensive Death Company and Sanguinary Guard forward early, and against a shooting-heavy field that first turn of exposure is brutal. The punch lands, but the counter-punch lands harder. Against grinding armies they trade fine. Against mobile scoring armies they win the melee and lose the map. The pieces aren't bad. Sanguinary Guard are genuinely dangerous. It's that the plan is a turn too slow and a shade too committal for where the addition sits. If the missions rotate toward killing, or a points drop makes the alpha strike cheaper, this chapter could move fast. Today, it's the hardest Marine army to win with. And here's the tell in the winning lists. The 15 Blood Angels players with a positive record don't hedge, they double down. 80% run 2 full Sanguinary Guard units. 73% run 2 Death Company squads with jump packs, plus a jumping captain. The winners aren't playing it safe and holding back. They're going harder on the alpha strike, not softer. The plan is fine. The addition just makes it expensive. Dark Angels are the most interesting army in the family because their 48% average is the biggest lie on the board. Split them by detachment, and the faction tears in half. The bike builds, the fast Ravenwing Outrider lists. Win, Company of Hunters has 58% across 50 games, and the smaller Darkflight Pursuit build is higher still at 67, though on only 20 games, so lean on the 58. Those are genuinely strong numbers. But then look at the other half. The slower, heavier builds. The most played Dark Angels detachment is actually the ground-bound Dark Age Arsenal, and it sits at 43. The Inner Circle Terminator build is down at 31. The winning lists are built around Azrael, the Inner Circle Companions, and, where it works, the mobility. So the honest read on Dark Angels is that there is no such thing as a 48% Dark Angels player. There's a 58% bike player and a 43% slow player, and the average is just the two of them standing next to each other. If you play this chapter to win, the data could not be clearer. Bring the bikes. The two halves genuinely play like different armies. The bike build is fast, evasive, and board controlling. It uses speed to dictate where fights happen and to score on objectives the opponent can't contest, which is exactly what the current missions reward. The heavy half is slow, tough, and expensive, and it runs into the same wall as Blood Angels and Black Templars. Durability without pace loses the mission even when it wins the fight. Azrael and the Inner Circle Companions anchor both, but the chassis underneath decides everything. If you take one thing from this video, let it be Dark Angels. The badge said 48. The build said 58 or 43. Always ask which build. And the winning lists make the bike case for me. Across the 25 Dark Angels players with a positive record, the recurring pieces aren't heavy Terminators. They're speed. Multiple land speeders, a brace of land speeder vengeance, Ravenwing Black Knights, all behind Azrael and the Inner Circle Companions. You can read the winning bike build straight off the unit counts. Space Wolves, 47.5%, and about as textbook average as a faction gets. Their signature detachment, the Saga of the Great Wolf, is the only build that holds the line. 51.5%, right at even, and fully half of all Space Wolves games. The others slide off. The Saga of the Beast Slayer down at 43. This is a character and Terminator army in the current edition. The winning lists are stacked with named heroes and elite bodies. Wolf Guard Terminators in nearly 90% of them. Logan Grimnar, Björn the Fell-Handed, the Wolf Guard Headtakers, Arjak Rockfist. It's an expensive, top-heavy way to build, and it produces a solidly mid result. There's no glaring weakness here, and no real edge either. The read on Space Wolves is that they're fine, genuinely, boringly fine, as long as you're on the Great Wolf. Off it, you're playing the weakest version of a mid-faction. The Great Wolf build works because it leans into durability and character-driven melee without overcommitting. Logan Grimnar behind a wall of Wolfguard Terminators is a hard core to shift, and Bjorn and Arjak add threat without demanding you race up the board. It's the closest a Wolves list gets to the board, control the strong Dark Angels builds enjoy. The weaker sagas ask you to be more aggressive or more specialized, and the payoff isn't there. So the Space Wolves story is a quieter version of the theme running through this whole family. One build sits at even, the rest fade, and the average is just where those two truths meet. And the winning Space Wolves lists are almost a solved equation. Of the 18 with a positive record, nearly 90% run the exact same core. Logan Grimnar, Bjorn the Fell-Handed, 2 bricks of Wolfguard Terminators, and the Wolfguard Headtakers, with Arjak close behind. That's not a range of builds. That's one list, copied. When a faction's winners converge that tightly, it usually means there's one answer and everything else is worse. Black Templars, the second of the 2 strugglers. 45.9% and a clearly negative composite. And there's no single detachment to rescue it. Black Templars play scatters across a dozen builds, and the most played one that clears a readable sample, Stormlance Task Force, sits at 42 on just 18 games. Nothing in the locker is separating from the pack. The winning lists are exactly what you'd expect from the most single-minded melee chapter in the game. Sword Brethren in 70% of them, a Marshal and a pair of Castellans, double Repulsor Executioners to carry them up, the Emperor's Champion. And that's the problem. It's a 1-speed army in an edition that rewards 2 speeds. Black Templars want to cross the board and fight, and the current missions ask you to also sit on distant objectives and score while you do it. The Templars charge in and win the fight and lose the game on points. Like Blood Angels, this is an aggression chapter getting taxed for its aggression, below the family average, and waiting on a rules change or a mission rotation to reward what it does well. The frustrating part for Templars players is that the army does its job. It wins fights. Sword Brethren and a Marshal-led core will win almost any melee they reach. But winning the fight and winning the game are different problems in this edition, and the Templars' toolkit for the second one is thin. They lack the speed of the Dark Angels bikes and the flexibility of Codex, so they solve every board the same way. Advance, charge, kill, and hope the objectives fall where the bodies are. Against an opponent who trades space for points, that's a losing exchange. A proud, focused army in an edition that punishes focus. Until the rules meet it halfway, it sits in the cellar with Blood Angels. The 10 winning Black Templars lists lean on a clear package. Double Repulsor Executioners to carry the army up the board. 2 units of Sword Brethren to do the killing. A Marshal and a pair of Castellans to lead, and the Emperor's Champion. It's a coherent, aggressive plan. It just tops out below the family. And finally, Deathwatch, the one where the disciplined answer is to say almost nothing. 50.8% across the whole edition, 60.5% this week. But those are 63 and 19 games respectively. That's not a win rate, it's a rounding error with ambitions. The composite even flags it. Provisional, thin sample, do not band. The unit prevalence numbers read 100% across the board. A captain in Gravis armor, an Indomitor kill team, intercessors. Not because those are auto-includes, but because there are so few lists that a handful of players define the whole picture. So I'm not going to tell you Deathwatch are good, and I'm not going to tell you they're bad, because the data genuinely cannot support either. The honest entry for Deathwatch this edition is, not enough games. No read. Check back when the kill teams have put another few hundred games on the board, and be suspicious of anyone crowning them off 19. And it's worth saying why the discipline matters here. Deathwatch is a low-population, elite army. A handful of dedicated players, a few dozen games. In that world, one player on a hot streak swings the whole faction's win rate by 10 points, and every unit they run reads as 100% auto-include. That's not signal. It's the small sample noise we spend half of every video warning about, wearing a faction's colors. The right move is patience. If Deathwatch are genuinely good, a few hundred games will show it, and their bands will tighten around a real number. Until then, the only honest thing to print next to Deathwatch is the game count and a shrug. And the winning list sample makes the point for me. There are only 5 Deathwatch lists with a positive record in the whole window. 5. Whatever composition they share, a Gravis captain, an Indomitor kill team, some veterans. It's 5 players, not a metagame. Illustrative, not conclusive. So, 6 chapters. Where does it leave you? If you just want to win with power armor and you're flexible on flavor, play Codex Marines. The biggest sample, the most forgiving toolbox, the best detachments in the family. If you want an actual edge and you'll commit to the build, Dark Angels on the Dark Flight Pursuit, the Ravenwing Bikes, is a genuine 60% army, the strongest single build in the whole family. Space Wolves are fine on the Great Wolf. Deathwatch, we simply can't call yet. And the 2 aggression chapters, Black Templars and Blood Angels, are the ones getting taxed by the current missions. Bring them because you love them, not because the record says so. But the real lesson isn't the ranking. It's that within the Space Marines, the detachment matters more than the chapter. A Dark Angels player on Dark Flight and a Dark Angels player on Deathwing share a codex and a color scheme and 18 points of win rate between them. Pick the build, not the badge. And that's the note to end on, because it generalizes beyond Marines. We talk about factions as if a faction has a strength the way a unit has a points cost. It doesn't. A win rate is a lens, and for a chassis-sharing family like the Astartes, it's an especially blurry one. It blends builds that play nothing alike into a single average that describes none of them. The useful question was never, are Space Marines good? It's which Space Marines, on which detachment, into which missions. Answer that, and the tier list stops being a verdict and becomes the beginning of the analysis, which is, in the end, the whole job. That's the whole Space Marine family, chapter by chapter. The full interactive breakdown, every chapter and every detachment, is on the site. If this was useful, subscribe, and tell me which faction to take apart next. Data is infinite. Understanding it is divine.